So I'm curious, like with stretching, what is your view on it and why?
So yeah, it's a great question. Everybody who I talk to always says, "Well, hold on a second. What do you mean? Don't stretch." So you're not the first one, and you won't be the last. Don't worry. I was a gymnast when I was a kid. So I started in gymnastics, and of course, every gymnast has to stretch, right? Because we're trying to be super flexible for the movements that we've got to do in gymnastics. I was then a dancer as well, so I got into a lot of dancing, and of course, stretch, right? Because you're looking for a range of motion that you need to be able to get into for the thing that you're doing. Now, if you think about runner. Runner doesn't need a huge range of motion. We need a specific range of motion to be able to run effectively. Now, of course, the faster you run, the longer your stride gets, the bigger your range of motion needs to be. But that isn't all coming from one place. And something we'll probably touch on later, which is to do with rotation and how you rotate the torso and how you elevate the shoulders and rotate through that movement. It all adds to your stride length. So when people are stretching and they're trying to get this range of motion, it's kind of like it's not understood. It's not fully understood where this stride length, this air time that we create when we run is coming from. And so people are trying to stretch their hamstrings. And I'm like, the first thing that occurred to me was, why am I trying to stretch my hamstrings? What am I trying to achieve here? So whenever somebody said to me, okay, you're injured, you need to do this, I would straight away, why? And I started questioning everything. So the latest research on stretching comes from a place of looking at muscles, fascia, and nerves, and what do we have stretch reflex mechanisms for if we're just going to try and stretch everything beyond the stretch reflex point? So if you think of how the muscle actually relaxes, gets to a point where it's going to its stretch, the fascia that's surrounding the muscle is already being stretched. So the fascia is the first thing to get stretched. And if the fascia gets stretched for too long or too fast or too many times within a certain space of time, which we don't know what that is, but if the fascia is getting stretched too far or too fast or too much, it will what we call plastically deform. So it won't go back. Now, the fascia is the first thing to stretch. The muscle is stretching way after the fascia stretches. So what you feel when you're doing a hamstring stretch or doing a calf stretch or whatever stretch you're doing is actually the fascia stretching. And we don't want to force that fascia to stretch. The arrangement of fascia is kind of like this. So it's always like this. And then when it gets stretched, it opens out and then pulls back. So it's like this crimped environment that fascia is in. So when we stretch and then we return, the fascia is going back to this situation. Now, the muscle starts to stretch after the fascia gets to this full stretch. So you're not stretching muscle before you're stretching fascia. Now, this was research that came out in 2019 from the Fascia Institute. There's a couple of guys one called Robert Schlepp, I think you pronounce his name, and I can't remember the other lady's name, but they were the authors on this study. This is through fascial dissections that they've researched this. This is not guesswork. This is actual research showing us now what happens when we stretch ourselves and we stretch our bodies. The human body is designed to resist stretch. That's the crazy thing about it. It's designed to resist stretch. And running, the best runners are actually the least flexible because they're the most elastic. They spend less time on the ground. They got less ground contact time. They're quicker getting off the ground, which is a property of more elastic people. Right? So when we hit the ground, we come off the ground much quicker because we're elastic. Now, elasticity and flexibility are opposites. They're at the opposite end of a continuum. So when people who are running, they're going out and doing their run and then they're stretching afterwards, what you're doing is you're actually unadapting to what running is asking you to adapt to. So it's kind of crazy that we see people going out for a run and then they're like, right, we must stretch after we run. And I'm like, no, you're undoing all of the good stuff that you did when you ran. Because the adaptation to running is improved elasticity. So if I want to be a better runner, I want improved elasticity. I want everything that running gives me. I don't want to unadapt to those things. And that's the crazy part of it. So when we're running, we want to hit the ground and get off the ground. We want to spend less time on the ground. And if you're a more flexible runner, you're actually going to spend longer on the ground rather than less time on the ground. So
that's again an interesting point, because that was something I heard. I forget, it was like a world-class power lifter talked about refusing to ever stretch his hamstrings. He's like, when you hit the bottom of a squat, you want that tightness because it pulls you back up. They're like, I never stretch my hamstrings ever. And running, our version of running is, when the foot hits the ground fully and you're going to load and take off the next step, you're stretching it more or less, and it goes that quick reflex.
Yeah, you're stretching it. When your foot hits the ground, you've got the arch of the foot. I'm going to create a crude arch of my foot. So here's your calcaneus, your heel bone, and there's the rest of your foot. Very crude. But when it hits the ground, what it does is it goes like that, and then it comes back. So just think of a runner who is suffering with plantar fasciitis, right? They hit the ground and their arch is not responding. Well, why isn't it responding? Well, maybe it's overstretched already. Maybe the amount of times you've hit the ground, it's actually just taken all of that responsiveness out of the plantar fascia. Maybe it's the muscles that are above the plantar fascia, so the tibialis anterior, the tibialis posterior, and the peroneals, that are not lifting the arch back up again. So why are we trying to stretch something that's already stretched? Like just the definition of plantar fasciitis, it says it's already stretched. The plantar fascia is already stretched out. That's why it's getting damaged. So don't force it to stretch even more, right? It's already stretched out. I have this thing of tight versus taut. So if we think of the body in opposites at all times, because of the way our body is this structure of equal tension all the way around, it has to create equal tension all the way around. Otherwise, it falls over, right? So if we're going to create this equal tension the whole way around to keep us up and keep us balanced and to keep our head on top of us, then we have to, if we've got tight muscles, we've also got taut muscles. We don't get tight and tight, we get tight and taut. So if the tight muscles are short, that means the taut muscles must be long. Now, it's the taut muscles that are saying, hey, I'm struggling, I can't do this anymore, I'm being pulled on, and it pulls, the tight muscles will pull on the taut, and then you'll feel this muscle screaming out and saying, hey, I'm struggling here. But what we do is we go and stretch these ones. So we're stretching something that's already stretched. That's the problem. That's one of the problems. So if we're stretching something that's already stretched and already screaming out in pain almost, we're actually making it worse. And what I find with people that buy the Runner's Rehab and a Basic 8, one of my ebooks, the first one, the first thing I say to them is we have to stop doing the things that are perpetuating the problem. Because if we don't stop doing those, it's like saying to a drug addict, we're going to get you off drugs by giving you drugs. We're just going to keep a little bit going. No, we have to stop. We have to get rid of those drugs, and we have to stop that. We have to stop that behavior. And it's a behavior. I'm addicted to stretching because it gives a dopamine release. That's another thing that research has shown over the last few years, is that stretching actually causes a dopamine release. It feels good. I get that question a lot. Why does it feel good? Dopamine. So we keep doing it, and it becomes almost an addiction to something that's just arbitrary. So I go back to the why. What are you stretching for? Well, to get flexibility. For what? For running. But running doesn't need flexibility, masses of flexibility. So why are you doing it? Oh, it feels good. But does drugs feel good? Does that make it good? We get onto this spiral of questioning, and it's like, if you kind of question everything and you look for the right answer, then you kind of see the logic is very misplaced. And again, like I said, flexibility and elasticity are on a continuum. If you're flexible, you're probably not going to be very elastic. And what do runners need? Elasticity to get off the ground quicker.